Why was he looking at her like that? Sergeant Maya Cross kept her head low, eyes fixed on the stubborn rifle in her lap. The desert had a way of turning everything into an oven, and today was no different. The air shimmered over the gravel like heat was alive, crawling across the ground. Even the shadow she crouched in the narrow line cast by a supply convoy offered little relief. Her flak vest clung to her like a second skin, soaked through with sweat. The wind wasn't wind anymore. It was breath from a furnace, dry and sharp with dust. Every inhale scraped her throat raw around her. The outpost was in motion, returning patrols crunching across the yard, boots grinding gravel, the low bark of squad leaders trying to herd their people toward debriefs. A burst of too loud laughter from a pair of infantrymen rolled across the open space. Somewhere close, a diesel generator coughed and rattled. Maya didn't move. She was locked in a fight, not with the enemy, but with the M4 carbine sprawled across her lap like a wounded animal. The bolt was stuck halfway forward, locked in place, like it had decided to die in her hands. It had jammed on her earlier that day, 4 clicks east, in a ravine where the wind cut like knives and the grit hung thick enough to chew. The storm had gotten into everything: canteens, skin, lungs, and now her weapon. She'd felt it seize in the middle of a burst. The sound of the mechanism choking mid-fire burned into her brain. In that half-second gap, the world had shrunk to her side-on and the desperate rhythm of Jenkins. Cover fire. She hadn't panicked. Crockett didn't train you for panic. But the moment was still sitting there, coiled in her memory, ready to bite again. Now she worked methodically, the way you'd work a puzzle with missing pieces. Lower receiver popped free. Bolt carrier slid out with a gritty scrape. The smell of oil and scorched powder clung to the parts. She turned the bolt in the harsh light and saw it. A fine film of rust-colored dust ground deep into the grooves. She muttered under her breath, brushing it out. Piece of junk. You had one job. Most soldiers would have tossed it into the armory bin, let a tech handle it. Not her. Not after what she'd seen. You didn't let your weapon out of your sight if you'd ever had to rely on it when nothing else was left. That was when she heard them. Footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, heavy in a way that carried weight, command weight. She didn't look up right away. Kept her focus on the brush in her hand. But she felt the air shift as the boots stopped just behind her. Focus, Sergeant. The voice was smooth, clipped. Carrying authority like a weapon, Maya's head came up. The man in front of her was tall. The kind of tall that still seemed to look down on you even when you stood. Salt and pepper hair cut to regulation perfection. Sleeves rolled neatly up his forearms. Tan uniform pressed crisp as if the desert hadn't touched it. No body armor, didn't need it. The name tag read, Harlan. The stars on his collar confirmed it. Major General. She was on her feet before she thought about it. Rifle still in her grip. Sir. At ease. But his eyes didn't stay on her face. They moved down, lingering on the disassembled weapon in her hands, and then, lower to her vest. She knew the moment he saw it. The shift was subtle. Just a slight narrowing of his eyes, a tightening of his jaw, but it was enough. Recognition, not confusion, not surprise. Recognition that went deep. The patch, it sat just above her trauma plate. Subdued black and gray stitching, edges frayed from years of wear. A stylized octopus. Barbed tentacles curling around a trident, eyes fixed in a permanent scowl. It was unmistakable. Kraken. You served with Kraken, Harlan said. Not a question, a statement, a landmine. Her fingers twitched around the barrel of the rifle. The chamber was empty. She never kept the round loaded on base, but her training kept her alert anyway. I did, sir. Her voice was even, controlled. His gaze sharpened. Cross, Maya Cross. Last listed KIA Ukraine. 2022. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Harlan studied her like she was a ghost he'd heard stories about, but never thought he'd see. You know, that patch shouldn't exist. Kraken was shut down, buried. Funny thing about burying things, she said, returning to her rifle. Sometimes they crawl back out. Something flickered in his eyes, interest, maybe, or calculation. How did you end up here? Infantry? No. Spec Ops insignia. No honors, your jacket's clean, too clean. Paperwork's a funny thing, she said. So is an eraser. For a long moment, neither spoke. Around them, base life carried on. A radio squawked somewhere. A Humvee idled. A voice shouted for a medic. But here, in the narrow bubble between them, the air felt heavier, older. I read the reports, Harlan said at last. The Dnipro was a mess. Bad intel, everyone dead. Friendly fire, cover-up, your name was on the confirmed Kia list. I know. His gaze dropped again to the patch. So what are you doing here, wearing that? Her eyes lifted to his. Because I'm still a soldier. And because Kraken didn't die in that canyon. We were murdered, and murder deserves answers. The words hung there. He didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. That memory could get you in trouble, Sergeant. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Then trouble's overdue. He glanced toward the horizon, then back to her. My tent, 1600 hours. Bring your file, your real one. Yes, sir. He turned and walked away without another word. She stood there for a long moment, the rifle in pieces on her lap, the sun burning her shoulders, the patch over her heart feeling heavier than the armor it was stitched to. She worked the bolt back into place, oiled the parts, reassembled it. The jam was gone. The weapon worked, but her hands were slower. Now, history had just caught up, and this time, it wasn't going to vanish quietly. What exactly was waiting for her inside that tent? The thought followed Maya all afternoon, a quiet pulse beneath the routine hum of base life. She moved through the hours on autopilot, checking weapons, signing logs, exchanging nods with soldiers who didn't look twice at her. But in her head, she kept circling back to that moment in the yard. The way the general had looked at her patch, like it was a key he'd been looking for. Or a ghost he'd hoped would stay buried. By the time the shadows had started to stretch long across the outpost, the heat had shifted from blistering to heavy, settling on her skin like a damp blanket. The air still shimmered above the gravel. Every step toward the command sector felt deliberate, like the ground itself knew she was heading into something she couldn't walk back from. At 15:58, she stood in front of the tent. 2 MPs flanked the entrance. Not the relaxed kind who'd greet you with a nod. These stood at full parade rest, shoulders squared, hands still as stone on the butts of their rifles. They didn't speak, didn't smile, just looked at her, and then at each other. Before one gestured toward the flap inside, the air was cool in a way that felt almost wrong, artificial, filtered, humming with the white noise of a portable AC unit in the corner. The smell was a mix of canvas, dust, and something faintly metallic. General Harlan stood at a map table in the center. A battered field lantern hung low over it, casting sharp light over the spread of charts and a tablet that glowed faintly beside. A thick folder. He didn't look up when she stepped in. Sergeant Cross. His tone was clipped. Neutral, you're early. You asked for my file, sir. She laid a manila folder on the table. It was lighter than it should have been, thinner than truth. Inside were the things they let her keep. Clean service history, standard quals, nothing that hinted at Dnipro or Kraken. Harlan reached for it, but didn't open it. He just tapped the corner with one finger, eyes still on her. Sit. She took the folding chair opposite him, posture straight, hands resting loosely on her knees. For a moment, he didn't say anything. The silence wasn't empty. It was measuring her, testing her patience. The light from the lantern carved shadows into his face, deepening the lines at the corners of his eyes. You should be dead, he said finally. I was, she answered. Once, twice, depending on how you count. The corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile. Not exactly. I never met any of you, he said. Kraken operatives were untouchable, not just classified off the map. No names, no funerals, no paperwork that wasn't already redacted. They called you non-reproducible assets. That's one way to keep people obedient, she said quietly. He opened the thick folder by his elbow, the one he'd been guarding without touching since she walked in. Inside were mission reports, most of them blacked out by heavy, ink-grainy satellite images and a single photograph. That made her breath hitch, a shot taken from long range. Dnipro. 3 years ago. Her face circled in red. This was 48 hours before the ambush, Harlan said. You were already being watched. Her voice stayed level. By who? Contractors. Valencia Systems. He said the name like it tasted bad. Off books, fully privatized. They weren't there to back you up, Sergeant. They were there to make sure you didn't come back. The words didn't explode in her head. They seeped in. Cold and thick, she already knew. Deep down, she'd known for years. But hearing it said out loud still felt like a blade drawn slow across old scar tissue. They burned us, she said. Deliberately, he confirmed. Her hands stayed still. In her lap, but she felt the tremor in her bones. Rage didn't come fast. It came slow, a coil tightening around her spine, waiting for somewhere to go. 3 survivors, Harlan said. She nodded. Me, Vega. Samir. We split. No contact since. We made a pact: stay buried, stay safe. Don't let the ghosts find you. And you broke the pact. Her gaze dropped to the patch. This wasn't meant to be seen. I wear it because I can't let them erase it. I won't. The general leaned back, folding his arms. He studied her like he was deciding whether she was a liability or a weapon. You've got eyes on you now, he said. Intel officers will come, maybe JSOC. They'll be polite. They'll smile. They'll offer reassignment, commendations, something shiny to keep you quiet, and if you refuse, they'll call me unstable. PTSD. Fabricate a psych profile. He gave a slight nod, and you'll be silenced. Her mouth curved not into a smile, but something sharper. Why warn me? His eyes didn't move from hers. Because I didn't bury Kraken. I just helped dig the hole. And I'm starting to wonder what's climbing back out. For the first time since she'd entered the tent, she let silence sit between them. Not as a pause, as a choice, when she finally stood, the chair legs scraping faintly against the mat. He didn't stop her, didn't order her to stay. As she stepped out into the fading light, the desert air hit her like a wall, hot and thick. The sun was low, burning the horizon in deep orange and red, and the sky beyond was already bleeding into night. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she walked back toward the barracks. She didn't look back at the tent, but she could still feel the generals. Words hanging in the air, eyes on her, watching, waiting for what she didn't know yet. But she could feel the past moving now closer, heavier, and this time, she wasn't sure it was coming alone. What had really happened in Dnipro? For months, she'd locked it away, not in some poetic sense, but literally buried in the muscle memory of routine, sealed under the constant hum of day-to-day soldiering. It wasn't that she couldn't remember. It was that remembering meant touching a wire she knew was still live. But Harlan's words had pulled it loose. By the time she reached the barracks, the desert night had fallen heavy. The heat was still there, but softer now, clinging to the skin instead of searing it in the quiet, with the low hum of the generators and the occasional crackle of radio. Chatter. The past began to unspool whether she wanted it to or not. She sat on her bunk, boots planted, elbows on her knees, staring at the patch on her vest. The octopus and trident stared back. And she was there again, Dnipro, 2022. The cold was the first thing she remembered, not the kind that bites, but the kind that seeps in, settling deep in. The bones. The industrial outskirts of the city were a graveyard of rusted rail cars and collapsed factory walls. The wind found its way through every broken window, carrying the smell of old oil, wet concrete, and something older. Metallic, faintly sour, the op had been simple on paper. Deep recon, zero engagement. Map the corridors of a rumored weapons facility. Extract, disappear. No air cover too sensitive. No QRF on standby too far from friendly lines. Just 7 of them, moving off the books under the old call sign, Kraken. There'd been no briefing room speeches. Harrington, their captain, didn't need them. He was the kind of leader who never raised his voice because he didn't have to. He'd been in the sandbox since before most of them could vote. They trusted him because you could see in his eyes that he'd carry the weight for all of them. If it came to it, the team, Vega, Samir, Reyes, Burke, Lane, Harrington, and Maya, each of them with their own specialty, their own scars. Each of them good enough to make the unit feel like a myth even to themselves. They'd landed outside the city in a stolen utility van, its rear gutted and converted into a rolling comms rig. Windows fractured from years of neglect, patched with black tarp. The drive-in had been silent. Each bump in the road, a reminder of how deep into the gray zone they were going. No insignia, no IDs, no second chances. The streets had been empty too. Empty. Even in abandoned zones, you expected to see scavengers, ferals, shadows watching from the corners. The Dnipro's outskirts felt vacuumed clean. They'd moved in staggered formation toward the complex. The place looked like it had been dead for decades, walls leaning. Roofs collapsed, the occasional squeal of metal somewhere inside. The satellite photos had promised nothing alive. That was lie number 1. It started as a sound and metallic click somewhere too close to be coincidence. Harrington had raised a hand, signaling a halt. Maya had felt her pulse slow, her breathing narrow, eyes sweeping every broken edge. Then came the flashbang. Not from inside the building. From behind, the blast punched through the cold air, searing white across her vision. She hit the ground, ears ringing, vision blurred. The first scream cut through the disorientation. Burke, shrapnel in the throat. Reyes was on him in a heartbeat, hands pressed to the wound, shouting for air support that would never come. Gunfire followed close, heavy caliber, the kind that chewed through cover. Samir's voice had cut in through the chaos, sharp and disbelieving. Those are our rounds. She remembered the way her stomach had dropped even before she'd processed the words. Harrington hadn't hesitated. Fall back. Positions now. But it was already too late. From above, the high-pitched whine of drones sliced through the night. Not recon drones, armed, small, fast, American. The kind you didn't see outside of black programs. The first missile hit the far wall, scattering brick and dust like shrapnel rain. Lane went down in a spray of rubble, her rifle skidding across the concrete. Maya fired until her barrel ran hot, dragging Vega by the straps of her vest into the shell of a doorway. There, pinning us. Vega shouted over the noise. They knew we'd come. Another explosion shook the ground, rattling her teeth. Samir took a round through the calf, but kept moving, hauling Reyes, still bleeding, still gasping, toward what little cover there was. Harrington stayed in the open, firing deliberately, methodically, like a man buying time he knew he couldn't afford. She'd seen him turn once, just once, to look back at them. No fear in his eyes, just certainty. Then he was gone into the haze, swallowed by the roar of another blast. By dawn, there were only 3 of them breathing. Maya, Vega, Samir. They hid in drainage tunnels for 2 days, the cold gnawing at their bones. Vega's arm hung useless from the shoulder shattered in the blast. Samir's leg was soaked in blood, his skin gray and eyes glassy. Maya kept moving, scavenging food and water from nearby ruins, ears tuned to every sound in the dark. When the radio finally crackled to life, her hands had tightened around it like a lifeline. But the voice on the other end didn't ask for status, didn't ask for coordinates. It delivered a kill code. Echo Black, Ashraven Lacken. She knew what it meant before the voice even cut out. It wasn't a rescue. It was a failsafe. If a team was compromised, if intel was exposed, If identities were burned, command was authorized to wipe them completely. It meant they were already dead. Maya had smashed the radio against the tunnel wall until it splintered. They buried their tags in the snow, swapped uniforms with bodies they found in a nearby skirmish. She cut her hair, forged discharge records in the ruins of an old embassy. Office, Samir took a new name. Vega vanished entirely, and then they scattered like ashes. She hadn't seen them since. The memory snapped back like a stretched band when a knock came at her barracks door. "Cross," Jenkins' voice called, muffled. Through the metal. "You okay in there?" She swallowed, blinked once, and forced her voice steady. "Just needed air." "You missed Chow again. They're gonna write you up. Add it to the list," she said. His footsteps faded. Maya sat still for a long moment before pulling her vest toward her. Her fingers traced the patch, slow, deliberate. Feeling every fray in the stitching, she didn't cry. Not anymore. But she made herself a promise. If Kraken had been buried in lies, she'd dig until her hands bled. And when she found Vega, when she found Samir, they'd light a fire high. Enough that even the suits in D.C. couldn't pretend it wasn't burning. Who were these men, really? The question hung in Maya's mind even before she saw them. It was there when she stepped into the mess tent the next morning, when she found her tray already cooling under the blast of the wall fan. The place was half empty. A few soldiers lingered at the far end, tossing cards on the table between bursts of laughter. She barely registered them. Her eyes kept flicking down to the patch on her vest, as if it might fade if she stared long. Enough. That insignia had always felt like armor, more than fabric, more than a memory. But now, it was a signal flare. Harlan had seen it. Worse, he had recognized it, and not the way someone recognizes a name from a rumor. He'd looked at it like it was a key to a locked door. One he'd helped seal. She didn't have to wait long for the next move. It came in the form of two men who did not belong to this base. They were waiting for her inside the temporary ops tent when she arrived for what she thought was going to be routine equipment checks, no introduction, no small talk. One sat with a clipboard balanced neatly on his knee. The other stood just off to the side, postured too still to be casual. Their uniforms were perfect. But wrong. Regulation sharpness without the creases of wear. Name tapes that meant nothing to her. Sleeves rolled, not for comfort, but to show they could be rolled. The man with the clipboard adjusted his glasses and glanced at her, his tone so calm it was almost clinical. "Let's make this simple. You serve with Task Force Kraken." Maya stood just inside the flap, the warm light from outside falling behind her like a halo she didn't want. She didn't answer. The tent rustled faintly in the breeze somewhere. Outside, a truck backfired. The man continued. "Your file shows you were declared Kier during Operation Foxgate. But here you are, alive, wearing a patch that no longer officially exists." She still didn't speak. The silence wasn't hesitation. It was control. The other man, the one without the clipboard, hadn't moved since she came in. His eyes tracked her with the steady patience of someone trained to wait for a single, precise moment to act. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't bored. He was waiting for the command to do something. Clipboard leaned forward. "You are aware, Sergeant, that displaying the insignia of a disbanded classified unit without authorization is a violation of protocol, potentially punishable under Article 92. She met his gaze. "I earned that patch. I don't recall it being revoked." It threw him. For half a beat, a flicker of something crossed his face. Irritation, maybe. Before he settled back into his script, "You were part of a highly sensitive, now decommissioned unit. Your reappearance raises concerns. We need you to walk US through your final operation. Everything you recall." "Everything?" she asked, folding her arms. "Including how we were sent into a kill zone without backup? How mission objectives changed mid-deployment? How we were painted as casualties so no one would question when friendly drones opened fire on our position. The man's jaw tightened. "You're making dangerous allegations, Sergeant. I'm stating facts," she said evenly. "If you want me to spill classified material, I'll do it in front of a Senate panel. Or maybe a camera crew." Clipboard's eyes narrowed. "You're still under contract. That means you can imprison me, disappear me, or burn me again." She stepped closer to the table, voice low, steady. "But let's not pretend this is about my safety. You want me to disappear quietly, pretend I'm a PTSD case who mistook a nightmare for reality." It was the second man who spoke next, his voice like gravel, not military gravel, but the kind worn into a man who spent years giving orders in places that don't officially exist. "Where are the others?" Maya didn't blink. "If I knew, I wouldn't tell you. Don't be brave." "Sergeant," he said, "be smart. I was smart once. That's how I got into Kraken." Her tone sharpened. "Now I'm just angry." Clipboard's patience broke. He stood abruptly, signaling the end of the session. "We'll be reviewing your record and mental health status. Expect a full psychological evaluation before the end of the week. You may be temporarily reassigned." "To where?" He smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere you won't be heard." An hour later, Maya was back outside, the sun glaring off her sunglasses, sweat gathering at the base of her neck. She wasn't sure if she'd said too much or not enough. It didn't matter. They'd put her on their radar across the base. She spotted Harlan on the helipad, talking into a satellite phone, his free hand clenched behind his back like he was holding something in frustration, fury, maybe both. She didn't approach him. Instead, she went to the armory, signed out a cleaning kit, and sat alone on a crate behind the barracks. The rifle came apart easily, her hands moving slower now, not from fatigue, but thought they would bury her again if they could, call her unstable, assign her to a desk in Germany, or worse, send her on a suicide run and lose the paperwork afterward. That was how the machine worked, and she wasn't planning to be a broken part. From the bottom of her footlocker, she pulled out something she hadn't touched in years. A small, battered hard drive, black military issue, encrypted old enough to be obsolete. Inside was everything she'd kept hidden: mission logs, audio, drone telemetry, and one file she had never dared to watch until now. It was Harrington. The last message their captain had recorded before everything went to hell. His face was bloodied, eyes sharp, jaw set. His voice came through steady, even as gunfire rattled somewhere in the distance. "If you're seeing this, it means the op failed. We were set up. This wasn't enemy fire. This was execution. If you make it out, tell them the truth. Tell them Kraken didn't die in the line. We were murdered in the dark." The screen went black. Maya sat there for a long time, the desert air cooling around her, the faint smell of gun oil lingering on her hands. They'd underestimated her once. They weren't going to get the chance to do it again. Kraken wasn't just a patch, it was a promise, and she was done being quiet. What was the risk in showing him? Maya asked herself that question with every step toward the command tent. It was past 2,200 hours, the base quieting into that strange limbo between operational readiness and exhaustion. Most of the squad was either asleep or pretending to be. A few stragglers smoked near the barracks, their laughter thin in the heavy air. The generators hummed low, almost like breathing. She carried the hard drive in her left hand, not hidden, not flaunted, just there, like it belonged to the night as much as she did, inside the tent. Harlan was hunched over a table cluttered with satellite readouts and classified dispatches. The light was dim, the kind of low, steady glow that gave the illusion of calm, but she saw it in the way his shoulders sat, tense, braced. He hadn't slept. When he looked up, his eyes narrowed, one hand reaching to power down the tablet. Then he saw what she was holding, A small, battered hard drive, black military issue. "You're not supposed to have that," he said. "I wasn't supposed to survive Nipro either," she answered. She walked up to the table and placed it between them. The drive made a soft, metallic click as it touched the map's edge. He didn't reach for it, not yet. "Sit," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. She sat. Her hands were steady, her voice even. "Everything you've heard is a lie. Every after-action report, every obituary, every line they fed to Congress. We didn't die in a firefight. We were bait, we were evidence, and someone decided." Kraken was easier to erase than explain. Harlan leaned forward. "Walk me through it." She nodded once, then connected the drive to his tablet. The screen came alive, its glow washing over the tent walls. The first feed was grainy, time-stamped, geotagged. Viga's body cam from the infiltration. Static lace chatter in the comms, boots crunching over shattered concrete. Harrington's voice came through. Eyes on objective, no movement, proceeding to breach. Maya's voice joined moments later, low and focused. "Watch the upper floors. Glass is busted. Could be lookouts." The footage rolled forward. The team moved like shadows, each step measured. Then the first explosion ripped through the audio. Brooke's scream followed, short, sharp. Viga's breathing turned ragged as gunfire erupted from nowhere. And then came the drones. The camera tilted just enough to catch the glint of one in the distance. Small, fast, unmistakably American. The sound of its whine was followed by a missile impact that painted the inside of the building in smoke and dust. Harlan swore under his breath. The feed kept rolling. Reyes went down. Viga dragged him out, blood pooling beneath him like a stain across the truth. Another explosion. The image fractured, and then Harrington's final message, cached from his helmet cam, the glow of fire flickering behind him. "They're not enemy rounds. Check your grid. This is a wipe. Valencia systems. They don't want this facility found. Burn your gear. Go dark. Leave. One of you needs to live." The footage cut to black. Harlan sat back, fingers steepled under his chin. The flicker of the lantern caught the lines in his face like old scars. "You kept this all this time?" "It's the only reason I haven't been found," she said. "Insurance? And the others?" Viga went underground. Samir's probably in Morocco under another name. "We agreed to disappear. I broke the rule when I joined back up." Harlan studied her, like he was trying to see the soldier beneath the ghost. This is a problem. It always was," she said. "That's why they erased us. No medals, no graves. Just 7 names buried in digital ash. You think this is enough to prove it?" "It's enough to burn someone," she said. "The contracts, the drone telemetry, Harrington's ID code. It's all traceable, not officially, but enough to get someone talking." He rose and walked to the back of the tent, pouring himself a glass of warm water from a thermos. He stared at it for a moment before drinking it in one long swallow. When he turned back, his face was unreadable. "If I forward this, I'll be flagged, watched. I'll be dead on paper before sunrise. Then—" "Don't send it," she said. His brows lifted slightly. "What?" "Keep it, hide it, leak it quietly. Just don't make it official. That's where they control the game." A slow smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "You've learned how the system works. I learned by being on the wrong side of it." For a long moment, neither moved. Then Harlan stepped forward, picked up the drive, and turned it over in his hand like it weighed more than it should. "This is the kind of thing that makes enemies," he said. She met his eyes. "Sir, I've had enemies for 3 years. What I haven't had is an ally." He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. Then he slipped the drive into his pocket. "You have one now." That night, Maya lay awake on her cot, the dim red glow of emergency lights casting faint shadows on the barrack ceiling. Around her, the others slept, their breathing uneven, some muttering in their dreams. She wasn't. Thinking about sleep, the truth was out now. Not public, not yet. But in the hands of someone who could do something with it, or destroy it entirely. She reached for her vest. Her fingers found the patch. Kraken wasn't a story anymore. It was a lit fuse. And she just handed over the match elsewhere. The building that was supposed to sleep never did. At 3:45 Eastern, in a secure SCIF 2 floors underground, a classified packet of data was decrypted. The technician wasn't told where it came from or who had requested it, but he'd seen material like this before. Black Ops records, biometric flags, mission metadata with missing timestamps. The file carried a single internal tag: Kraken, unauthorized unit data recovery, at Foxgate. 2 hours later, the Secretary of Defense's private aide summoned a meeting. 5 names, 1 room. No official record. By 8 o'clock, Maya Cross had become a problem again. They called themselves the panel. It wasn't an official title, just a name passed between people who didn't exist on organizational charts. A mix of brass suits and shadows. They didn't answer to a chain of command. They were the chain, buried under layers of plausible deniability. And today, Kraken was inconvenient again. In a closed conference room, a woman in a navy blazer, Dana Kellis, Defense Intelligence Liaison, slammed the printed still frame onto the table. Harrington, frozen mid-sentence in his final message. The words, "This is a wipe." Valencia systems hanging in the air. Where the hell did this come from? She demanded. Colonel Avery Weller, budget controller for programs that didn't exist, folded his hands. Harlan Syria, Cross gave him the data dump. She was confirmed KIA. She got better. Weller said dryly. No one laughed. The footage was verified. Matching logs pulled from something called Project Wintertrace. Drone telemetry, names, contracts, and signatures. They all knew what that meant back in Syria. Maya woke to the faint sound of boots outside her door. She rolled out of bed silently, checked the slide on her sidearm, and moved to the window. 2 MPs, not from her unit, not protecting her, watching her. How fast could they erase her if they really tried? The answer was already unfolding. By midday, the MPs were still outside her barracks. They stood in the same positions, neither talking nor moving beyond the slow, mechanical shifts of weight. That came from long hours of standing post. Maya didn't bother asking who had posted them. She knew the answer, or at least the shape of it. When she went to the motor pool, the sergeant at the log desk didn't meet her eyes. Her orders had been voided. No explanation. No replacement tasking. When she tried to sign out range time, the corporal behind the counter told her the schedule was full. His tone was polite. His eyes weren't. When she put in a CUM's request to call her sister in Nevada, she was told the lines were under maintenance. It was isolation 101. She'd seen it before. The slow grind of credibility and access. Tighten the circle. Push the target toward paranoia. Wait for them to either break or lash out. Maya wasn't breaking. And if she lashed out, it wouldn't be in the way they wanted. That night, the floodlights along the perimeter cast the desert in a pale, artificial glow. The outpost looked like a stage set, the sand catching in silver ripples under the high beams. Maya climbed onto the low, flat roof of her barracks. She'd brought her vest with her, not wearing it, just setting it beside her like a companion. The patch sat under her palm. They wanted her quiet. Buried again, they'd made one mistake. They'd given her time from her cargo pocket. She pulled a small, waterproof notebook. The cover was worn. The pages lined in names, call signs, half-faded coordinates. Each entry was a thread. Someone she'd worked with. Someone she'd trusted. Someone who'd once owed her a favor. She turned to one name and underlined it twice. Samir. Last known. Near the Turkish border. Working under an alias. If he was still alive, he'd understand the stakes. He'd know what it meant for her to reach out now. She didn't have a secure channel yet, but she would. In Washington, a different game was unfolding. On the third floor of a congressional office building, Representative Nolan Greaves sat in his chair staring at a paused video frame on his secure monitor. Maya Cross, blood on her cheek, fire reflected in her eyes, frozen mid-breath. He'd watched the full footage twice. He'd read the internal memos that came with it. He'd been told, off the record, to forget it. He hadn't. How deep does this go? He asked his aide. Deep enough that nobody wants to touch it, sir. Greaves looked at the image again. I'm not nobody. Back in Syria. Someone slid a folded napkin across Maya's table in the mess hall. She didn't look up right away. She kept her spoon in her soup, kept her posture casual. Only after a beat did she place her hand over the napkin and pull it toward her. 3 words were written in tight block letters. I knew Harrington. She finished her meal before she stood. Didn't look around. Didn't hurry. That night, Captain Rachel Monroe, a logistics officer with sharp eyes and a quieter kind of authority, met her in the dim corner of the supply tent. I trained with Kraken, Monroe said. Briefly, before they pulled me into a support slot. I didn't go to Dnipro, but I knew the silence after. Knew it wasn't right, but I thought. She hesitated. I thought they must have had a reason. They didn't, Maya said. They just had power. Monroe slipped her a small, prepaid set phone. Use this if you need to run. I'm not running. Then what? Maya's voice was steady. I'm recruiting. In a forgotten server room in Berlin, an anonymous user uploaded an image of the Kraken patch to a secure, invite-only message board for intelligence veterans. The caption read, "One of us made it." Within an hour, there were a dozen replies. About damn time. Ghost, don't forget. Ready when she is. At the Pentagon, Dana Kellis slammed her palm onto a polished conference table. It's unraveling piece by piece. Colonel Weller didn't even look up from his folder. Then, it's time we cut the string. You're suggesting, if Cross won't shut up, we shut her down. And the congressman? Crush. The leak? Discredit the witness? Delay the hearing? And if that doesn't work? He let the sentence die in the air. That evening, Maya sat on the roof again. The wind pushed sand across the steel like dry whispers. The patch lay flat on her. They thought Kraken was a unit. They'd forgotten it was an idea, and ideas didn't stay buried forever. What happens when you finally speak the truth out loud? Maya had asked herself that question every night since Dnipro, but always in the abstract, the way you imagine a cliff before you ever stand at its edge. Now she was standing there. The hearing room wasn't what she'd expected. No grand chamber, no marble pillars. Just 4 white walls, rows of microphones, and the flat, bright light of government overhead fixtures. Everything about it was designed to be unremarkable. The kind of place where truth could be quietly filed away without ever touching daylight. Her nameplate sat in front of her on the long table. GT, Maya Cross, Ret. The word in parentheses dug under her skin. She still woke at 0500, still carried a rifle, still breathed like a soldier. But on paper, she was an afterthought. Across from her, a line of committee members sat, their expressions ranging from bored to cautious. At the far left sat Nolan Greaves, the congressman who'd been quietly pushing to get her here at all. He met her eyes once, gave the smallest of nods. The chairwoman leaned forward. Sergeant Cross, you may proceed with your statement. Maya leaned into the microphone. Her voice didn't waver. She told them everything about Dnipro, the ambush, the drones, the kill code, the days hiding in drainage tunnels, patching wounds in the dark while listening for the next round of boots. She named the survivors, Viga and Samir, and the identities they'd assumed. She described the exact moments they'd realized the fire coming down on them wasn't from an enemy they'd been sent to find, but from their own chain of command. She didn't stop there. She handed over the decrypted orders, the biometric scans proving her identity, the financial trails linking Valencia systems to covert appropriations hidden across 3 unrelated budget lines. She named every officer who'd signed off on the operation, and everyone who'd signed the order to wipe them out afterward. Then she played Harrington's message. The captain's voice filled the sterile room, clear and calm even as chaos roared in the background. They sent us in not to extract, but to erase. We saw something they wanted buried, and now they're burying us with it. When the screen went black, the room was silent. No applause, no outrage, just the cold weight of words that couldn't be unsaid. Outside the building, protesters had gathered in the gray morning light. Veterans, civilians, and a scattering of old operatives wearing patches they weren't supposed to still have. Rangers, pararescue, Delta. Near the front, an older man in a wheelchair held a placard with a faded Kraken insignia taped to it. The ink had run, but the shape remained. Someone had spray-painted across the marble steps of the East Wing. Ghosts don't forget. Security had tried to scrub it off before the hearing. The paint didn't budge. Inside a corporate high-rise in Arlington, Dana Kellis sat alone in a shuttered conference room, watching her career erode in real time. Every file she deleted had resurfaced, some with her signature still visible. An alert flashed on her terminal. Intel subcommittee calling for audit of Kraken case files. Her phone rang. She didn't answer. Some messes couldn't be managed. Some names didn't stay buried. 3 weeks later, under mounting bipartisan pressure, the president signed an executive order to declassify Operation Foxgate. CNN ran the footage that night. They didn't air the full clip. They didn't have to. Viewers saw Harrington's face, heard the words, "This was murder." Saw Maya standing on a Syrian rooftop, wind tearing through her hair, looking into a drone camera like she was daring it to blink. The country understood. Greaves introduced the Whistleblower Protection for Classified Operatives Act. It stalled in committee for months, but the public didn't forget. Protests grew. Veterans groups spoke out. Tech companies and even foreign journalists backed the bill. Eventually, it passed, narrowly, for the first time. Men and women who had operated in shadow could step into the light and demand justice without being erased for it. Maya didn't speak to the press. Not once. She refused every interview, every documentary crew. She wasn't here to be a hero, but she agreed to one thing: training again. Not for war, but for memory. Harlan arranged it quietly. A base in New Mexico, reserved for veterans seeking reconnection. She called it the Surface. A play on words. Ghosts could surface too. It wasn't Kraken reborn. It wasn't a unit anymore. It was a message whispered from one survivor to another. We made it. You're not alone. How do you end a story that never really ends? The desert wind carried the scent of rain that would never fall. Maya stood alone on the ridge outside the base. Her boots sunk half an inch into the packed earth. Below, the horizon stretched in every direction, a canvas of gold and ash under the fading light. The patch was in her hand, the Kraken insignia frayed along the edges. The once bright threads dulled to the color of dried blood. It had survived everything she had. The tunnels, the months on the run, the years of silence. She didn't wear it anymore. Not on her vest, not on her shoulder. It had become something else now. Not an identity, but a reminder. Behind her, voices carried on the wind. The anniversary gathering had drawn more people than she'd expected. Veterans from units that didn't officially exist. Widows and siblings of those who hadn't made it. A few young soldiers who'd only heard whispers about Dnipro standing quietly, as if afraid the ground itself might hold their names one day. Harlem was there, leaning on his cane, speaking with Greaves under the awning of a battered field tent. Monroe had flown in from Qatar, Samir from somewhere along the Mediterranean coast. Even Vega had made it, her arm rebuilt in steel and polymer, her smile still a rare and dangerous thing. They weren't a unit anymore, but when they moved through the camp, people stepped aside without realizing why. The Surface had grown in the past year. It wasn't just a veteran retreat anymore. It had become a quiet nexus, a place where stories that couldn't be told in official reports were spoken over coffee at 0600, where maps and old mission logs were kept in locked cases for those who needed to see them. Maya had insisted on one rule: nothing left the grounds without consent. No photos, no leaks. This wasn't a campaign or a cause. It was survival, written in a language only they could read. Still, word had spread, not through headlines, but through the invisible lines veterans used to find each other at sunset. The gathering moved toward the fire pit in the center of camp. The flames were already high, the logs stacked into a pyramid that glowed against the growing dark. People brought tokens, patches, dog tags, letters that had been written but never sent. When it was her turn, Maya stepped forward. The crowd hushed. She didn't speak at first. She turned the Kraken patch over in her hand, feeling each rough stitch, the ghost of the needle that had once bound it. "This isn't about closure," she said finally. Her voice carried without strain. Closure is a word people use when they want you to stop talking. This is about weight. The weight of what we carried, the weight of who we carried. She looked at the fire. They took our names once, tried to take the truth with them, but the thing about names is, you only lose them if you let them go. She held the patch over the flames. The light licked at the fabric, catching along the edges. "I'm not letting this go," she said. "Not ever." Then she dropped it into the fire. The cloth curled, blackened, then disappeared into the embers. The symbol was gone, the meaning stayed. Later, after most of the camp had settled, Maya walked the perimeter with Vega. "Doesn't feel like an ending," Vega said. "It's not," Maya replied. "It's just not the same kind of fight anymore." They stopped at the far edge, where the land fell away into shadow. In the phenomenal distance, the faint lights of the highway shimmered. "You ever think about what would have happened if Harrington had made it out?" Vega asked, "All the time. What do you think he'd say?" Maya didn't answer right away. She thought of the captain's voice, calm in the chaos. The way he'd looked back just once, enough to leave a memory instead of a shadow. He'd say the same thing he said then, she answered finally. "One of you needs to live." Vega nodded. They stood in silence for a while, the cool night air brushing past like the ghost of a hand. A month later, a small package arrived at Maya's post office box in Santa Fe. No return address. Inside was a new patch, Kraken insignia, freshly stitched. The colors were sharper this time, the lines cleaner. No, she didn't sew it onto her vest. She pinned it above her desk at the surface. Not as a badge, not as a call sign, as a warning in the years that followed. Operation Foxgate faded from the news cycle. The footage lived on in online archives, debated on forums, clipped into conspiracy videos with grainy narration. But in certain circles, the ones that didn't write things down, it remained something else. A lesson, not about war, not even about betrayal, about endurance on the 3rd anniversary of the hearing. Maya returned to the ridge. The desert hadn't changed. The wind still whispered across the rock. The horizon still opened like a door no one could close. She stood there for a long time before speaking. Though there was no one to hear her, sometimes the strongest thing you could do wasn't to speak. Louder, it was to outlast the noise. The sun dipped below the line of the earth, the last light catching in her eyes. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.